Hi, everybody. Welcome to Life's Not Linear. Today, our guest is Maggie Dauss. Maggie, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Maggie, and I'm so excited to share some of my story, my not so linear story. But just kind of high level, I grew up originally in Pennsylvania, but through, as these things happen, parents getting jobs transferred, ended up in Wisconsin in Cedarburg in middle school. And, the world is small when you're in middle school and feels like major life changes, moving and whatnot. But it certainly, I think anyone who's been a new kid anywhere can relate to that feeling of anxiety and also excitement. And, you get to kind of meet new people, explore a new place. And so started that kind of experience in middle school. And I I grew because I was in Cedarburg, or what we called the Cedar bubble. I was definitely someone who was anxious to get out, and it's like I'm gonna go to the coast. I'm gonna go to college somewhere far away. I had family on the East Coast, so that's I was gonna get the heck out of Dodge, and I made it as far as Chicago, which did feel like a world away in lots of respects. And I'm so glad that that's where I landed for my college experience. I had a lot of friends who were doing, a very kind of traditional, state school kind of experience, football games, all that kind of stuff, which certainly is a lot of fun, and I always enjoyed visiting them. But I felt like being in school in Chicago in a city, it forced me to grow up in a lot of different ways and to feel like I needed to really be an adult and to attempt to not get lost all the time. I have terrible sense of direction, as my husband and probably anyone who knows me will tell you. So, everything from navigating, being in college and a college student, which is certainly a lot, but then also knowing like what L train to take and what part of the city, you want to get to. And but really just truly enjoyed it. And even for a brief moment when I thought like, oh, maybe I should be having that other experience, just leaned in and really said yes to what I was doing. And so just fell in love with my experience with that city, but also found just a lot of really amazing people, kind of your true blue friends and friends that are family. And I feel really lucky to still have a lot of them in my life. So I felt like I really grew up, and it wasn't actually so bad being only a train ride away from home. So, hi mom and dad kind of thing. But yeah, so I really enjoyed that. And when I was in school, I decided to study communications and sociology. And honestly, it was a point where now in my own role in supporting students during college, I wish I had had more kind of outside perspective on ways to navigate like what you want to study. I fell into those categories because I just really enjoyed it, which is certainly a reason to spend time learning and studying. But I think that I didn't always have like full perspective on how to be strategic in like getting a certain degree, or like what the path was for different careers. And then ultimately, I graduated during a recession. And so,
I didn't know.
yes. So in a way, I think even if I had exactly like a career in mind, I imagine that terrain would have been shifting anyways. And so for me, in a way, like because I was a bit, it was broad and kind of you can sort of pursue multiple different paths that worked in my favor. And being open-minded to pursuing those different paths was certainly a good thing. And ultimately, through some friends of mine, learned about a program, an Americorps program that was there in Chicago. And kind of on the west side of town. And I realized that, even in middle school, high school, like doing service was always super important to me. Important, like my parents were always really involved in the community in different ways. And so value-wise, it felt aligned really well. And then coupling that with like, I don't even know where else to look for different opportunities or what I want to explore, but, dedicating time for a year to give back and to kind of embed myself in a different way felt really important and worth doing. So I ended up doing a year of service in Chicago and for a program called Project Yes. And that was kind of my first taste of both like community and volunteer engagement, and then also providing support to students. I found out quickly that I wasn't necessarily keen on being a teacher, like a full-fledged teacher, but I did love the like one-on-one interactions. I love being able to help students kind of explore their own like college options if they were interested in that, or just ways that they could get engaged with the community. So it was a really important experience. I think that it's something that I always encourage people to consider, especially in the high school to college transition. Like if you're not sure if pursuing higher education is for you, that's okay. It just isn't for everybody, but that doesn't mean that you can't still get really meaningful experiences. So I think this is one way that you can do that. And I met so many awesome people too, like people that I would have never crossed paths with, that I learned so much from. I've been very much in my college campus bubble, which was a lovely place to be, but it was great to burst out of that and to spend some time in a different area of the city and with different people. So I did that for a year, and then actually ended up doing a second year, but made the move to Minnesota. I was going to Duluth, Minnesota, which my friends thought I was nuts, leaving Chicago for Duluth. There may have been a guy involved. He might now be my husband, so it all worked out. But that was also a really important year for me. It was a much more independent role within Americorps at this organization. And it really, again, like more deeply embedded me within the community outreach. And so I think, by saying yes to kind of in a time of, again, like where you just didn't really know what was going on, like in that first experience. And I was literally working for a program called Project Yes. So that was probably a sign at the time that I didn't even realize. And then saying yes again to taking a risk to leaving the city that I really did love a lot, and trying something new again was great. I mean, it was an adventure, and I got to work with some just phenomenal people when I was in Minnesota, and grew a lot and grew up a lot and learned to be more independent, and was taking on some more leadership roles. And as we thought about kind of where we wanted to land, that ultimately brought us back to Milwaukee. And it's hard to believe that that's probably close to a decade ago now, which is pretty wild because, well, one, just time flies, and two, I never, ever, ever thought I would come back to Milwaukee. And maybe at the time was more thinking, oh, I'm not going to come back like to Cedarburg, to the suburbs, whatnot, but just did not think Wisconsin would be where I would land. And admittedly, first moving back, it was hard. There were certain parts of it that just weren't what we had wanted it to be. My first job back just didn't really, it didn't make me excited necessarily. And so, you have those moments in your life where then you start to walk and you're like, oh shoot, like, did I just make a major, mistake? Like, should we have just come home for a couple weeks and visited? We had family there. Like, did we actually need to move back? And again, kind of similar to, my first semester or so in college, where you start like second guessing yourself, and then you just have to be like, man, I just need to lean into this and see what happens. And really, a lot of credit goes to a good friend of mine who had been in Milwaukee for a while, and she is just one of those people who, when she loves a place, just wants everyone to love a place. And she kind of became my own personal Milwaukee tour guide. And I hope everyone has someone like that in their life, whether it's from Milwaukee or another city that you go to. And so kind of got exposed to different ways to get engaged with the community. And then, was able to make some connections and to get the job working at the organization I'm at now with the Greater Milwaukee Committee. And I can ramble on about all of that, but I don't know if I should stop there and
no, that was
interrupt me.
No, this is a great timeline. And I was just gonna ask, like, how'd you go from Americorps to whatever was next, whether that was the Greater Milwaukee Committee or something else?
Yeah, so with the experience I had that was focused kind of around community outreach, a little bit of community education, and not always student support, but definitely some of that like mentorship type roles, that set me up in a way to make connections, if nothing else, especially around like wanting to be in a position to have that like community facing responsibility. And so, just like through the connections that I made after being in Milwaukee for a little bit and actually getting to kind of hear, I grew up in Cedarburg. I didn't grow up in Milwaukee. I really didn't know anything about Milwaukee. And so kind of getting a lay of the land, I was able to kind of just leverage those different experiences. But I knew really quickly with my first job that I got when I came back, it was very insular. It had a focus around development and fundraising, which was important for the organization, but I just felt really disconnected. So I was looking for something that would make me feel a little more plugged in, or put me in a position to help others plug in a little bit more. And so through a friend, got connected to the Greater Milwaukee Committee, which is an organization that I had heard a little bit about. It was kind of veiled in mystery in certain respects, the movers and shakers of the community. But like, at the time, I don't think I could find the website sort of thing. And I interviewed for, at the time, it was very specifically working on their innovation initiatives. And it was definitely a bit of a leap in certain respects, while the kind of day-to-day felt like true to what I was looking for. It was super focused on entrepreneurship and innovation. How do you get companies that are connected into the startup space and vice versa, and all this. And so, there were definitely a couple months that I was like, oh my gosh, I might be the wrong person for this job. Maybe I was just really, really good at interviewing, and now here I am, and I don't know what I'm doing. And literally, like in the first couple of weeks that I was there, I actually was still kind of interviewing at another organization, which I've shared before. So Michael Hosted, if you're listening, you know the story. But it was, again, kind of like one of those moments where you're like, oh, like is this right for me? But I think we so often get just like very lost and caught up in our own thoughts. And I remember talking to my dad, and he was like, look, like, if you want to leave, you can leave. Like, people leave jobs every day, and other people get hired, and the world moves on. But like, if you're just nervous about it because it's uncomfortable, then you owe it to yourself to see this through and to not have a total panic attack about it, and just lean in and maybe even have some fun with it. And so I did. And I'm so glad, because, there were, it certainly wasn't then suddenly like smooth sailing. There was, management changes within my team early on that were pretty big, and definitely prompted those moments of like, oh great, like what did I get myself into? But then new people joined, and really the work that we were doing just continued to evolve. And so I think that it's one of those things, like, sometimes you have to really be patient and trust your gut, because it just is so easy to get stuck like in your own head and assume the worst, because when it is uncomfortable, we as humans don't like to be uncomfortable. So I'm really happy to be at the GMC, which, for those of you who don't know what it is a civic organization. And they really are, the staff is supporting our membership to really see through what they hope to, that will help move Milwaukee forward and to make it a really wonderful city for everyone. And so it's a pretty awesome, experience to be able to help support those efforts. And in my role, specifically with the Commons, we get to do that with most of the time a lot of young people, but you can use young however you want to. And it's had a focus on talent and connecting people together, and all those things continue to ring true with kind of where I wanted to be and the type of work that I wanted to do. So and I think just, again, like, kind of leaning in and being open to what may not feel like spot on right away, but just like saying yes and giving it a minute and just enjoying the process, and surrounding yourself with really good people, which I'm super fortunate to have that, and to have a support system and people who are willing to fail with you, willing to succeed and celebrate and all that fun stuff.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really timely kind of with where I'm at right now. I finally finished all my classes, and I'm like, I could go a traditional route of engineering, or I could, say yes and lean in. And how do you lean in? I feel like people say all the time, like, lean into this, lean into that. And I'm like,
yep.
What are some like tangible ways of how to do that? And how do you like, when you kind of like lean in and then you lean back, how do you get yourself to like stop leaning back? And
that's a great question. And you're right, lean in is it is a bit overused. Well, I think part of it is it is that, like, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And we say that a lot at the Commons. I'm sure we said it a bunch of times when you were working with us as well. And, I think part of it is about trust. And so part of it is just, one, trusting yourself. And then two, looking around like at the network that you've created for yourself, assuming you've done that, whether it's mentors or friends, people who really are sounding boards. So that way, like, as you kind of will start leaning in and are nervous about, like, you've got other people to help support you with that. I think it's about being just kind of curious. So, for you or for anyone who's like, well, I went to school for this, and so I guess I'm supposed to do that. And sometimes there's like some danger in that mindset of like, well, this is my degree and here's my career trajectory, because you might be missing out on lots of different things. So that's something to be really mindful of. The leaning out process, I think, it's unavoidable in certain ways. I think some people are really good about just full steam ahead, and if they fail hard and fast, and they move on. Or maybe they don't, and they just happen to be really good at finding the right thing for themselves. But when you lean out, I think it's just giving yourself time to like reflect and process. So whether it's maybe you pursued a job, like for you, maybe you pursue a job in engineering and you get there and you hate it. You're like, crap, like, what am I doing? Time for me to lean out because I need to reassess. Like, that's okay, because it's important that, not every job you have is going to maybe make your heart sing every single day. But again, like, if you're working with good people and there's some value in all those different components, like, you can find the good in that. It's just kind of a matter of like what you need the most, and it's your life and your career, and those all blend into one. So just like kind of knowing what your focus is. And I think those like moments that you lean out are really good for that reflection, and to sit down and be like, okay, if I'm not feeling comfortable with this, or just something isn't aligning, like what is it? Is it because like there's a value like misalignment? Is it because I just still really don't know? Those are all really normal things. And so again, that's where you then look at your network and you think about like, who can I tap into to have conversations with that can give me real honest feedback. That's where like mom and dad type people in your life aren't always best, because they just love you and want to make sure you're happy, which is super super important, but they may not always be able to give you those like hard truths. But I think that like taking time to assess and then to figure out, okay, who else maybe do I need to talk to who's not in my network already? And maybe now that my like next kind of leaning in isn't necessarily because I'm gonna like, okay, I'm gonna just go jump into this job now, because that one didn't work out. Maybe it's just building your network in a way that can help you be more strategic with whatever comes next.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Puts a lot into perspective, and I like the reflective process, because I feel like a lot of times when we don't know, or we're like, hey, we don't like this, we like panic. We're like, oh crap, like what's next? Why don't I like this? And instead it's like, we're just learning everything, whether you like it, you don't like it, you don't know. It's like you're all just learning.
Exactly.
Thank you. Going back to graduating in a recession.
Yes.
I guess, how would you compare that to now and what's going on now? And like, I don't know, at that age, like how were you able to, like as you're graduating, like I feel like walking the stage, I'd be like, okay, well, there's no job. So I don't know, how'd you handle that?
I mean, and honestly, in certain ways, I feel like this is kind of a whole other ball game. Like I really feel for everyone who's coming out of school right now. And which, I mean, I think one, it's like for me now, like being in a position where we were with the Commons, where we could actually try and help people who are either just graduating or maybe still in school, who lost internships or job opportunities. Like I was so grateful to be in the position to offer that, because I guess for me at the time that I was graduating, that was essentially Americorps, but they weren't set up. They just happened to still, have their federal funding and all that, like it was a different dynamic. I think also in certain ways, I was kind of blissfully unaware of the real reality of like what was happening. And I don't remember really having like explicit conversations like with my parents about what they were experiencing at the time, because I really feel like it was our parents. I mean, they were taking a brunt on of really the pain. I think that it wasn't like this thread of conversation that existed amongst friends who was like, oh my gosh, we have no options. It was just like, we have options, but perhaps we're going to be getting paid less than what we thought we would. Like, I think, people are kind of disillusioned about what to expect, like no matter what's going on in the world, about what you're going to make coming out of college. Like, I've got all this debt. I'm really eager and excited. I'm creative. Who's going to hire me? And I want to make X amount of dollars the first year. And people are like, that's great. Maybe we can get there in 2 or 3 years. And so I feel like, while we had similar things going on, this just feels like a type of shift that is really intense. And so I think it's really important, again, for anybody to have that kind of network, because it really is going to be about who you know and who knows you. I was able to navigate and find the Americorps option because I was, talking about kind of just that I wasn't really sure what I wanted to pursue. And I made sure to talk about that like with friends, and they were, and that's how recommendations were given and other introductions were made. So if you're not talking about it and you're not putting yourself out there, then, I mean, I think in general, people are assuming that students or recent grads are struggling or going to struggle right now. But if people don't know how to help you, then they're going to focus on helping someone else. I've been really impressed with some of the interns that we've had this summer who have been so proactive and are out there connecting to different people on LinkedIn, who are asking me for different introductions. And like, those are the students and the grads they're going to land jobs and they're going to be okay. But like, if you aren't taking a hold of that, like, there's so much to be done. You could easily get lost in the mix. So I think like really being accountable to yourself and just being proactive is going to be super, super important, because no one is going to just hand it to you, at least most of the time anyways. So I mean, I feel like for us, generally in the millennial bucket who were graduating during this last recession, like, we have all the empathy. And now I'm hoping that we're also, a lot of us are in positions where maybe we're able to hire, or we're able to, make connections in our own network, things like that. So putting a call out to my peers to keep an eye out for our recent grads and students.
So that's awesome. Okay. I want to talk a little bit more about kind of like the work you've been doing for the Commons. And so working in the nonprofit space and in the startup space is difficult. And I guess I just want to touch on your experience from interviewing for like an innovation position and then to now, like, what has that transition been like, and those different leaps?
Yeah, so when I interviewed and started the Greater Milwaukee Committee, the Commons wasn't a thing. We were experimenting with a lot of different programming that was, for the GMC and its programs, we kind of all function a little bit like startups. We're fundraising for our program budgets, and we're lean teams and things like that. And so a lot of what we were doing at the time was called Innovation Milwaukee. And so a lot of it was kind of like grand, big networking events, conferences, that style. And while in the moment it felt really exciting and sticky, we would look at the long term, we're like, but is it sticky? Like, are people really making the connections that they need to, and are companies finding talent the way that they need to so they can keep innovating and growing? And so I think I was really happy to have, when Michael joined the GMC, and then we were building connections with our program director, Joe Peschel, who is very involved in Startup Milwaukee. And as we started like looking at the landscape kind of opportunity of all these different networks that we could potentially connect, I started seeing, I'm like, oh, this feels tangible, and it feels like impactful in a long-term way, where we're not going to do just this one thing, and we're not going to spend all of our energy fundraising for one big splashy event. Like, it's points of engagement year round that really felt genuine and authentic, and at the time very needed. And I think still very needed, but it's evolved, I think, in the way that companies want to be able to engage with talent and vice versa. And so for me, it became kind of this evolution of like my own personal role in feeling much more connected to the work, and felt like kind of things were starting to align. We're like, oh, like, this is a space that I'm familiar with. It's still very new, and like, we were still very much in that space of entrepreneurship and innovation, where my background wasn't necessarily exactly in line with that, but the mindset and kind of the attitude around it certainly was fitting. And so it was one of those moments where I trusted the process, and very much trusted my team members to be like, we have this vision and it feels really tangible and people feel excited about it. And so if we're going to experiment again on something, like, this feels like the thing to experiment. And so, when we started the program, we were all essentially working on it kind of part-time. We still had a lot of activity that was happening from our existing experiment, so to speak. And so there was this, period of time where we were kind of doing both, but it was great because then it was a really clear, like, side by side of like, this thing, this commons thing, this is working. And this other stuff, while there are bits and pieces that we can borrow from, like, I don't think this is actually the thing. Like, I think this is the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sort of startup mentality of like being nimble and pivoting, and luckily having support from our leadership and our funders to do that kind of thing, was there. And so we were able to make that shift, and I was able to make that shift to be able to be full-time on the commons and to continue kind of exploring like what it looked like to do the support for students and helping them kind of in that sort of like career advisor type role, but academic advisor, but then also getting to tap into, you're here in Milwaukee, and whether you're originally from here or you're from Chicago or coast, wherever, like, do you know what's going on? Like, are you plugged in? Do you feel like you've built a network outside of your campus? Like, how can we help and how can I help? And so it's felt like a really good evolution of kind of where I was. And I'm sure too, part of it is just, you start building your confidence over the years, and you generally know what you're doing, or at least know the right people who can, fill in the gaps. And so it's felt really good to have, like, see this grow and evolve to what it is now. And again, I think a big part of it too is just having the right people around you that you're working with, because there are certainly days for me, and I think for all of us on our team, where we're like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? Like, this is crazy, right? And but we're there to kind of ground one another, and to encourage one another, and fail when we need to, and move on. So I think that also has been super important in how I've been able to kind of step into these different experiences.
That's awesome. Thank you for just sharing, like, kind of your journey. And I like how you really emphasize, you tell us your story and your journey, but then you always have been coming back to, like, your team too and the people around you. And it's really just, like, great to hear that. I don't know, because especially coming from an engineering background, when you think of business or traditional, you think of, okay, I go to work, keep work and home separate. But, like, I think it's very fruitful and just more, it's just like energizing. And I feel like you're able to be your best self when you are comfortable with your team, and, like, they're kind of like your family too. So
absolutely. Well, and I think that too is kind of just this reality that we are all experiencing right now, that we very truly have a blend of work and home. I said to you earlier, we're like essentially living at work. And so whether my 2-year-old decides to join a call, or I have time where it's just me, like, knowing that I have, like, if nothing else, my team is always understanding, and our whole staff at GMC, like, everyone is navigating so much right now. And really, I mean, as much as it has its very challenging moments, I think it's been really refreshing to have just, like, this new kind of level of authenticity to everyone that you're interacting with. Like, oh, like, you have a family. Some people don't even know, like, as you widen your circle, some people don't even know, like, what your family looks like, or, the obligations that you have outside of what you see them do day to day at work. And so,
it's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, in certain respects, a bit of a silver lining that I think that, you just get to see people being really real, and sometimes it's painful for mainly for those of us with 2-year-olds, like, hanging on to us. But I think that a lot of the time too, it's also just it's just real. It's real life, and this is just what everybody's dealing with together.
Yes, that's such a great point. I've been, like, realizing that as I'm on Zoom calls, when somebody's like, oh wait, sorry, I have to, like, answer this, or, oh, like, get out of here, like, I'm on a Zoom call, and, like, that kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, cool, like, they have a sibling, or, like, oh, like, how cute, like, that's their dog, or something like that. And it
Absolutely,
I don't know, it's like the little things that are more humanizing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that helps.
Zoom, it's like there's a weird level of like intimacy essentially we all have with one another. We're like, oh yeah, here we all are in our real true selves.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I have one last question for you, Maggie, and I'm wondering, um, what is a piece of advice or maybe your biggest lesson that you've been able to keep with you over these years and these transitions that you would want to share with students today?
Yeah. I think that, oh man, I mean, I think part of it is just rooted in being open-minded and not talking yourself out of what could be a really great opportunity. Because as much as I was able to pursue things, and not talk myself out of certain experiences, there were definitely things that I considered and walked away from because I was worried about it. And now the important thing is to not dwell on that, and to then just move forward with the path, and knowing that you can always pivot and explore different things. But I think like just going into anything that you're going to pursue, just be open-minded. Know that a week into a new job or a new city or new school, whatever it might be, like it's not going to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And really, as my mom says, we're really just looking for like perfectly imperfect. And you know, what is going to make you happy, and what is going to, even if you leave an experience, like at least knowing that you were open to it and that you learned something and you grew from it. And that's kind of, I try most days to have that approach to what I'm doing.
Thank you so much, Maggie, for sharing your like timeline, your experiences, and just like the openness and the love that you give to others in Milwaukee and students and me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm here for anybody who wants to chat.